very beautifully crafted as a book, and we knew straight away it's going to be a massive challenge to bring to the screen.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Talal, and you are listening to the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. On today's show, we are joined by a very special guest. He is one of the finest cinematographers in the film industry today. With credits to his name, such as Ophelia and Measure of a Man. His next work, The Luminaries, which stars Eve Hewson, Eva Green, and Himesh Patel, will begin airing on STARZ on February 14th. On the show today, the very talented Mr. Denson Baker. How are you, Denson?
I'm very well, Talal. Happy to be
Awesome.
here.
Hey, beautiful. And again, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. I really appreciate it. How have the last 12 months been for you? We're living in such a crazy world right now, and especially being a creative artist as yourself. How have you been hanging in there?
Yeah, well, it's certainly been an interesting time, and it wasn't how I'd planned to be spending 12 months of my life.
Yeah.
But I've actually, in reflection, really actually benefited from it quite a bit. There's been a lot less shooting, but a lot more just finding inspiration and just getting a bit more time to do other things as an artist. I mean, less time on set, but a lot more just exploring other people's works and really reflecting on my own style and my own vision of where I see myself going in the future. So I feel like I've used the time productively, and I'm just starting to ramp back up again. And there's a whole bunch of productions that are all kicking in. So I feel like it's about to change.
Yeah, I bet. And it's so interesting that you bring that up because so many creative artists that I've had the pleasure of speaking to over the last 4 or 5 months is I get the same rough answer that you just gave, where it's we're so used to always being on the go or trying to, do our next shot or set up our next shot that we sometimes forget to internalize things and do self-reflection. So I think it's so great that we actually get a chance to sit back and be like, all right, let's see what else is out there rather than what we're just putting out there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sure, it's a crazy world. And I'm curious, did you shoot anything during COVID? And did you have any experiences during all of that?
Yeah, so the timing was interesting. I just finished shooting a TV series in Rome. It was a big ancient Roman epic series, and so we were literally just wrapping up. In fact, one of our actors just bizarrely became ill in a way which we couldn't quite work out what it was, and no one really understood. And this was in December of last year, and it wasn't until 4 or 5 weeks later that COVID actually became a word that we'd even heard of.
Yeah.
And we later discovered that's what our actor had in Rome back at that point. But it meant that I'd finished a job, and the work that I had planned got pushed back. It's all starting up now. But didn't really do much shooting. I did get to do post-production on that series. Most of it done remotely, grading the episodes. They were all edited remotely. So it was an interesting approach for me. I hadn't really worked that way before, but the post house sent over a calibrated monitor, and I was able to watch quite high resolution versions. We sort of back and forth for a while until we made sure I was seeing exactly what the colorist was seeing. And then once we had all the technical issues out of the way, I was able to preview and communicate to her how things were coming and changes that we wanted to do. And it actually became quite an interesting process. And I had to learn new ways of creatively expressing what I want to do purely just in email or just screenshots and drawing shapes, which was interesting, and it's good. I've sort of learned a new skill set. But that was the only real big bit of production that I did during that time. I still managed to squeeze in a couple of fashion film shoots and did a bunch of stills photography. Got to test some new lighting that Roto Light sent over some of the new LEDs that
Nice.
were just coming out when lockdown started. So they weren't getting them out on any production. So they sent some of those over to me, and I set them up in my apartment. Got to do some nice testing and play with what they were capable of. Mostly it was just people in the house that I'd be able to get to model for me or do some self-portraits. But yeah, but that was a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, and that's just one of those things, right? You just have to be so
Yeah, but then other
adaptive
than
on
that,
what's going
I've
on.
been getting to catch up on watching a lot of stuff.
So what have you been watching? What's a couple of shows or a couple of movies that stick out that you watched over the last year?
Yeah. Oh, so many. I've finally really actually been able to catch up on stuff that I missed that week at film school and had never caught up and seen. I've also been reading a few autobiographies by filmmakers, so I'd always catch up on when rewatching a few of those. I just finished reading Oliver Stone's um, autobiography, which came out just before Christmas, I think that was. And so I was looking back at his earliest stuff from
Yep.
Salvador and Platoon, and just hearing the stories and then watching the films was great. I mean, it's an opportunity I don't often find myself having enough time to do that kind of thing. So I felt like I got to have another chapter of film school recently too.
Well, hey, there we go. At least some good came out of this, right?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And one thing I find so interesting and fascinating is your story, and especially how you got started in the entire creative arts. So let's rewind the clock a little. Where does this all begin? And what were some of your early influences that made you want to be in the creative arts?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I've had a passion for movies since I was a kid. I mean, we had a cinema down the road. I was born in New Zealand, and we had a cinema just like 100 meters down the road that my grandfather would take me to, or my dad would take me to movies, even before I was young enough to really know what I was watching. But I just felt like that was such a part of my upbringing, and it was, it was all mainly Hollywood blockbusters that I was
Right.
getting to see there. But
Mhm.
it just that was just such a big thing for me. And I think the biggest influence early in my life that sort of put me on the trajectory was actually my dad had traveled a lot of the world quite young in the 70s, and he had this photo album of photography that he'd taken in India and all parts of Asia and all over Europe that he'd captured of him and my mum when they just after they got married. And it was just such a great thing to flick through these. And he wasn't a professional photographer, but for me it was just a way of journeying into these stories, looking at these
Yeah.
images that he had
Mhm.
taken. And then that led to him then getting a subscription to National Geographic magazine, which I felt was the same thing as looking at my father's photos. I was looking at a little captured moment and just reading these stories into it and feeling like I was getting to travel the world through these pictures. And I think that started to influence me on just that's what I want to do. I want to travel the world creating pictures and taking people on similar journeys. And I went to art school in Western Australia, and I wanted to be a director at that point. So I went to an art school which offered the whole aspects of it was a media design it was called, but we started in art history and we did painting and sculpting and typography and graphic design. But then
Right.
that then worked on to by third year you were a filmmaker, and I started out wanting to be a director, but I was one of the few students who knew how to use a light meter and had been taking photos and using video for so long that I really knew my way around the technical aspects to the point that I was really feeling like I could push the medium creatively.
Yeah,
And I
for sure.
just started getting asked to shoot every other student's film that they were directing. And just sort of I realized that was the directing I really wanted to do, was the visual storytelling, I guess, creating atmosphere and creating worlds and finding frames and ways to with lighting, creating an atmosphere and taking an audience into places that either they didn't go to or that didn't exist. And that became my passion. I mean, I went to the Australian Film, Television, Radio School shortly after that, but that was a process too. I went out and started working on um, short films and then TV series as a camera assistant, and so I
Mhm.
got a good taste of from being a video split operator. It was my first job on a feature film to eventually pulling focus on TV shows. And I realized enough that I knew how to do the job, but I wasn't great at the job. In fact, I've always felt more anxiety being a camera assistant than I ever have as a DP. I felt like there was less, there was a different kind of pressure.
Mhm.
And so it's been, being a DP has been my real passion and push for the greater part of my life, I guess. I started out doing doing smaller commercials, and it was just getting opportunities that opened up to having me eventually get to do the next thing. And I mean, I think that's really the thing, is just setting your goals and knowing what the next step in that trajectory is, and knowing that you can't just leap straight to being a DP of a major motion picture. That
Right.
there's a process to get there. And if you
Yeah.
create those opportunities, then the next opportunity opens. It might be a director. You've done a really low budget music video, ends up being the person who gets the first feature film that you get offered. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how it's played out for me.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting because it kind of snowballs. I feel like for a lot of creative artists, where it's like one thing leads to another. And did you find when you were first starting off, going through film school, and we all have these visions and these goals of what we want our careers to be, and did you find that it kind of followed a linear trajectory where you kind of had one thing in plan and you kind of thought that the next goal or the next project would be this, then followed by that? Or did it kind of like pinball back and forth where you're doing one thing, which then all of a sudden led to another thing, which was nothing like what you thought would be the next step? How did that all go
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. More like the latter version there for me. Yeah, it was. I mean, I think I would say my first break. I mean, I've had a few really good ones. One of them actually would probably be, I had been camera assisting for a long time, and it was just one of those moments where something happens and a door opens.
Yeah.
This was one where I was working with a German cinematographer who I really admired and was learning a lot of stuff from him. And we were doing this commercial. It was nothing of any great note. I mean, in terms of who it was for or anything, but I was his camera assistant, and helping him on a whole bunch of levels, not just pulling focus. But we had this accident on set, and the guy who was presenting the to camera had a piece of heavy machinery malfunction, and it went and pierced through his shoe into his
Ooh.
foot. Like, and it was straight, and we were shooting out in the countryside in these beautiful, I mean, we're going for like a Terrence Malick Days of Heaven kind of look of
Yeah.
photography. And there was like big heavy farm machinery that did this, created this accident. And so they had to rush this guy to hospital.
Ugh.
And Uli, the DP, he was quite badly affected by seeing this incident, and he just said, "I'm not shooting anymore. I'm sitting this out." And uh, the agency people came over and said, "Well, we've still got to do the final shot. It's the
Right.
product shot." Uli says that you're, pretty good cinematography yourself. Do you mind taking over and finishing this off? Which I was like, okay, well, this is an opportunity, not the best circumstances to
Right.
fall into it. And I was also a little bit shaken myself, but
I bet.
I'm now a DP on a professional job. Yeah, and so then I finished off the shoot, and got my first shot for a show reel, I guess, for professional commercials. And then from then on, I felt like I can now call myself a director of photography,
Yeah.
and more opportunities arose then. I had another circumstance when I was still at film school as studying to be a director of photography, and that was the great thing about the Australian Film, Television, Radio schools. Once you're in, you had already chosen what strand you were. You went in as
Yeah.
a DP, and so you considered yourself a DP throughout it. And yeah, I was at the end of my second year there, and I got an email forwarded to me from a German production company looking for an Australian DP to shoot part of an international project, which they wanted to have technology communicating to all different parts of the world. And they asked me to shoot this Australian portion of it. Well, in fact, they didn't ask me; they just were looking for DPs, and I sent my show reel, which I just cut together that day, actually, when I got the email. So I put it straight, and this was before you could upload it. That wasn't even really a thing. So
Yeah.
this was a while ago. So I had to send a tape, FedEx a tape to Germany straight away, and got it to these guys and got the job. And then meeting that whole team, they came over to Australia, and we shot this piece, and we got along really well. And then they invited me over to Europe to start shooting commercials with these guys, and just another door opened, and I just saw a whole nother variety of opportunities present themselves to me. But even at that point, I like, commercials are great, and I just was finally getting some really good jobs that were paying a lot of
Yeah.
some good money, but it was drama that I really wanted to pursue. So I just knew that I had to find openings in that direction. So I came back to Australia, even though I was getting offered more and more work over in Germany, but came back to Australia and started doing short films with students who I'd graduated with, or just other directors that I was getting to meet. And those it was one of those short films that I did, which was actually not necessarily the greatest of the short films that I did. It was a whole lot of fun, but the director on that, Steve Pazwalski, he landed his first feature very shortly after that, and asked me to be a cinematographer, which they generally, producers and studios don't necessarily want to have a first-time director and a first-time DP on a feature, but they saw that we had a great relationship, and I'd just done a project which had won an award, and they thought, well, let's give these guys a go as a team, and then it was on. And once you've got that first feature, as long as it's not a total disaster, then hopefully the next one comes and budgets get bigger, and went from there.
Absolutely. So in your own words, what would you say is a cinematographer, and what role does a cinematographer play on set?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I found like it's taken a while for me to see that it is more than just the textbook definition, which is as a director of photography, you're creating the visual style, you're choosing lenses, often composing frames and directing the lighting. It'd be a whole team that I'm working with as the gaffer or chief lighting technician who's actually setting up those lights and doing the technical aspects of that. You'd often have camera operators who still offer up frames, and still are very experienced people around you. So a lot of it is also just bringing the best out of the team that you have with you, and just being that filter of ideas, and just finding what's the best answer for every solution. But it really does start very early on with from reading a script and starting to visualize it within my own mind, having those conversations with the director, bouncing ideas back and forth, and then they turn into storyboards, and then that turns into a list of, well, this is the gear that we're going to need, and then I've got to go to a producer and say, this is what we want, and then they'll say that we can't afford it, what else can we do? And it becomes this back and forth until we arrive at this place where we're there on set with the actors ready to go. And that's the thing that I also learned probably more so out on the job than I did ever at film school, is that as a cinematographer, you're also part of capturing that performance, or even just assisting that performance and happening. And sometimes help that performance be the best that it can be is actually taking a step back and not getting too involved or pushing things technically too much for an actor. You've got to give them the space when they need it, and create an environment where they feel that they are supported and feel very open and free to give what they've got to give. But then also there's going to be those times where we're doing a very technical shot, and I need to be in a position where I feel like I can walk up to an actor and say, or through the director, obviously, but this one's just that little bit more technical, and we want to try something a little bit special, or is a little, thing we're doing with the speed of the camera or the lens or a remote head, or, on some motion control or whatever it is, we might need to have some an extra bit of work. So there's that feeling of involvement as a collaboration with everyone across it. But when it comes down to what is photography, it really is that visual style that's capturing what a production designer puts in front of the camera. I'm directing that camera to capture what's there, find those angles, and create the lighting, atmosphere, and storytelling visually.
As you mentioned, it's such a collaborative medium where everyone's got a role to play. It's like a little jigsaw piece where your job is also, in being in coordination with the director, with the producers, and vice versa, to really get the best performance that you can really get out of whatever we're shooting. Now, one thing I know you're probably not going to admit, because you're probably just way too humble to, but you're such a master at capturing light in your shots. And that's the one thing, just looking at your reel and just your past projects, that it just stands out to me, because being a crazy cinema fan myself, your shots are like paintings, man. It's like things you want hung up on your room, or it's just you watch them and you're, that's just, it's just visual, like eye candy. So what's your background, especially with light, and why is it so important to get the perfect lighting for the perfect shot?
Oh, I mean, I'm really happy to hear you say that. And that's often something that I really strive for, because I do feel like with every production you do, you want to have some of those iconic frames that when someone's left the cinema, or when someone says, what was that movie or show like, then there's those images that, come to mind and stick in there. And hopefully they do people will put them on the wall. but a lot of that is light, and I find that it's a really interesting thing, because I do a lot of I've done a number of productions where we would shoot with two cameras, or would have a stills photographer on set, and often that light, will look absolutely beautiful from one particular
Yeah,
angle, and that's often what you're lighting it for. But it's just not going to work if the stills photographer is coming in from another place. So a lot of it is really just building it around the frame. And I mean, I've got little things that I really love, where I like to put a light, and the quality of that light, whether it's soft, and particularly like to always light from the off camera side of a face. So it's you're shooting into the moodier shadow side of a face, through to just finding that, which every production I'll always insist that we get to do some camera tests and makeup and
for
costume
sure.
tests, where we get some
Hmm.
time with the cast. And I mean, if I'm working with an actor who I've seen on screen many times before, or can find some of their work, you can always look at what other DPs have done to photograph them. But you'll find that there's always those certain angles where they just really ping and look great. And if you find that light, and you can bring out a cheekbone and bring out the
For
sculptural
sure.
qualities in a face, then that's when a shot really pops, I guess. So that's part of my job too, is to find that with an actor early on. So then when you're in there, you like some of the times, when a director and actors are talking through some blocking of a scene and where we're going to put the camera, some of the things I'm looking for and thinking of is, where's the sources of light? There's the window, we can get some nice soft light in there, or a hard shaft of light there, or where are the candles or the lamps, and then have a little bit of say into where that blocking can go, so that we can
Yeah,
create those opportunities for that quality of light to happen. Something else
absolutely.
is,
Yeah.
which is so important, is that early discussions early on, when you're starting to look at those locations and looking at what the scene is within the script. It's just knowing what time of day is going to work really well for what scene, and just pleading your case. Hopefully you've got a first AD who's really open to scheduling to have that great shot which you want to have at dusk, or you can be there early in the morning for that great light, and that you're not out in there in the middle of the day when the sun's at a toppy, harsh angle, that you can, there's all that, manipulating the schedule so you're in the right place at the right time, which doesn't always happen. And that becomes a big challenge too, when you got to do that important close up on the star, and you've only got, that's the only time of day you can do it, and it's just not going to look great. Then you got to find all the different ways to control the light and turn it into something else.
Yeah. And being a massive movie fan as yourself, on the topic of shots, what are some of your favorite shots in either TV or movie that just vividly stick out into your mind anytime
Mm,
someone mentions photography?
yeah, so many. I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, there's so many DPs whose work I absolutely love, and all particular films of theirs. And I mean, I don't know where I'd start listing them off, but I mean, I love a great silhouette and an iconic shot. And I mean, the thing about a silhouette is it becomes quite graphic, and you've
Yeah.
got films that are literally graphic novels put on screen, where they will go for a very graphic shot, to then other films. I mean, everyone loves Roger Deakins, and he does it,
Oh,
better than anyone. But just that real, when you've just got that great image, and you're seeing the shapes, and the people are separated from the background, and they pop out from the screen, and you've got this graphic, painterly image, as you described. That's it for me. But I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start plucking them from. But I mean, when I was at film school, it was like I felt like I was kind of more influenced by a lot of the it was interesting, because I grew up with your Star Wars, Back to the Future,
yeah.
Indiana Jones, loved all those films. But then as I went through film school, I sort of found myself attracted more to European cinema, and particularly where it was soft light and painterly frames. And then I find myself sort of seeing things that are somewhere in between, that are the big screen epic, but then influenced by a painterly look. I mean, we just when talking about silhouettes and graphic frames, like Conrad Hall immediately comes to mind for me, and Road to Perdition, as like
That's
immediately,
beautiful.
just
Yeah.
there's frames in that which are just coming to mind. So I think the first film that really influenced me in a big way was probably City of Lost Children. I don't know if you know this film, which Darius Khondji
Yeah.
shot.
Hmm.
With Jean-Pierre Jeunet, like that has got so much atmosphere. And for me, that was like, I mean, it happened to me seeing a lot of films, but for me, that was just seeing a world that was unlike anywhere I'd been or known, but it just felt so like you were there, just such great color and texture. And I just love that. Mhm.
And that's the beauty of it, right? It's like once you see that image, it just sticks with you. Even if I'm sure we've all seen so many just bad movies where the plot maybe doesn't stick with you, but some of the imagery just stays with you. And you know what? Like, there's always some wins you can take out of every project. And as long as, a viewer can notice what someone's trying to do, because I don't think anyone goes into a film or a production trying to do their worst job or their bad job or
Mm.
anything like that. Sometimes just circumstances and the way things come out in editing might not be what you first envisioned, but as long as there's something that someone can take away from it,
Mm.
it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So let's transition over into your next project, the Luminaries, which begins to air on STARZ on February 14th. For the audience listening, the synopsis is as follows. The Luminaries is an adventure mystery set in the midst of New Zealand's 1860 gold rush period, as men and women travel from the world to make their fortune. So, Denson, what was your experience like shooting this project, and how excited are you for its debut on STARZ?
Mm. Well, I was very. I mean, I really love the material. It's come from a absolutely brilliant book. From first hearing the project described, and when we first, in fact, when we first arrived in New Zealand to start pre-production on it, the scripts were still very much under development, and it was one which is. I mean, if any of your listeners have read the book, it's very dense, and there's a lot of incredible storytelling in there, and there's all these interconnected characters, and the characters cross over
Yeah.
through their links to the planets and to the star signs, and it's very beautifully crafted as a book, and we knew straight away it's going to be a massive challenge to bring to the screen in 6 1-hour episodes. But it is actually a really interesting world as well. Like, it is a time period which we've seen many times before. It's set in the 1860s, but to see it in New Zealand isn't as common, and it's also in a time in New Zealand when it was this really cosmopolitan, intercontinental crossing over of
Yeah.
people coming from all over the world, and that's what made it really fascinating. And they're all bringing their own fashion and their own passions, and all their those passions are intersecting, and it made it cool. It was like this place on the bottom end of the earth that not a lot of people knew about at that time, where there's all these fascinating people coming
Yeah. So
together,
it's much diversity in terms of just, as you mentioned, fashion, the way people are, backgrounds. It's definitely
mm,
really cool with that. Yeah.
and we really wanted to reflect that in the visual as well. We wanted it to feel contemporary for its time, that it was like on the cutting edge of the 1860s, but we also wanted it to feel like it wasn't a dusty, musty period project for us watching it now, that it still felt like it had such energy and
Yeah.
passion and in it. And there was various different ways that we wanted to bring that in there, but there was just being in this part of the world with this incredible landscape and these great opportunities for cinematography is why it was so exciting to me. We're on this coastline, which I mean, it's just some of the most beautiful, rugged black sand and jutting cliffs and massive waves crashing into the side of this amazing islands down in the bottom of the Pacific. So we really wanted to capture that feel of it. There's shipwrecks. There's so much atmosphere and texture in that world that it was something that I just had so much fun just putting that into a painterly frame. And that was something which I did talk about in my team, is I wanted certain moments that felt like just a really classic painting, but
Yeah.
just had a little bit of a modern touch to it. The costume designs were brilliant. The production design
Oof.
was great. Just so much
Absolutely.
texture and color. We didn't want it to feel dusty brown, which you can easily go when doing a period film. We wanted to have some vibrancy, but still have it feel real and lived in. And something which everyone got on board with was that we didn't want it to feel like the costumes had just come off the rack, just been made, and
Yeah.
which so often happens when you're doing period shows. We wanted to feel like these people have lived in these clothes and they've been in the mud, and they only wash them once a week, if not less, and they only wash themselves once a week because there's no running hot water. So it felt like we wanted to feel like a really lived in, grimy, but still sexy world.
Yeah, and it's so true because it's such a rich and vibrant world that still has the contrast of you feeling like you were there at the time. And again, that's a big credit to you and the entire team. So, what would you say is the biggest challenge of shooting a period piece versus something that is set more so in a contemporary setting?
Yeah, I think the very first number one challenge, and I'm experiencing this right now because I'm doing another period project, is that you don't just walk out down the street and you've got a location that's ready to shoot. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
There's power lines, there's curbs, there's speed humps, stuff that didn't exist back then. I mean, people have renovated properties, even um, the historic homes don't look like they do anymore. They've
Right.
invariably painted the walls white and put power sockets all over the walls and put fluoro tubes up there. So that becomes the big challenge, is not how we're going to shoot this, but what are we going to have to build to shoot, or what can we see at this location that still looks like it's of the time, and what do we take out, how much road can we cover. And so it really does become a challenge of building the world within the frame. And I think that's something which I really enjoy but it's also a big challenge, is that you're creating a world that only exists within a rectangle.
Yeah.
And there's always other stuff going on outside there. So the challenge is to just put as much of it into there and give it some depth, and to throw as much in there, and then hopefully you get a sense as an audience member when you're watching it that there is a whole lot more world out there, that there's other stuff going on behind you, and the sound designer helps the audience feel that they're feeling like there's all this other activity going in there. But I'll do that same with the frame. You don't want to just show everything that you've got in one shot. You might just crop it so you're feeling like there's a few people there, but there's going to be more people outside the frame. There's the back of a horse there, so there's going to be more horse, and hopefully more horses. There's going to be much more to it than what's necessarily there. And the other thing that's interesting and challenging with a period film, this is what I've really started to really enjoy with the period projects that I've done, is that there's I feel like there's a somewhat of a bit of you've got to honor some historical accuracy there on many levels.
Right.
I mean, for most people watching the Luminaries, they're not going to have they're not going to know what it was like at that time, or what was what that looked like, or what was available to these people. So it's our responsibility to show them without there's a little bit of flexibility there creatively, but you want it to feel authentic,
Yeah,
because
stay true to the DNA of what it actually was at the time.
It might be the only opportunity for some audience members to even reflect and think historically back to that time. So you don't want to go too far off and make it false. So, I mean, the first thing I start looking at is when did electricity come to this place that we're shooting in, or is it just candles and oil lamps and flame, and what else? What were the street lights like? Just starting to look at how lit a world these people exist within, which becomes a really tricky one, because it would have been really dark in New Zealand at those times. They didn't really, I mean, it wasn't a major city, so it didn't have big street lights, and only some of them had gas. It was all candles and oil lamps and moonlight. So that becomes your lighting palette, and creating that. Yeah, well, using those as your sources of light. So that's an interesting challenge.
For sure. Now, as I mentioned at the start, it's got such a great cast. You got Eve Hewson, Ava Green, Himesh Patel. How much easier does your job become when you have such great actors just on set?
Yeah, I think that is everything. I mean, that's who really, like, an audience isn't looking at nice lighting and nice painterly frames. They are watching these characters, and they've got to go on that journey with them. They've got to love them, hate them. They've got to feel something about them, and they've got to, relate and go on the journey with these actors. And when they're incredible actors, and actors who look great on the screen and have a really great screen presence and really create those bring those characters to life, that just my job is such a pleasure then. And I love it, and I loved working with those cast, and they all had their ideas, and they all had the little things they wanted to bring to the characters. So that's the other thing you want to do, is that there needs to be memorable moments, or there needs to be little character traits that you don't necessarily make a big deal of, but you want to put them in there. And so as I start to hear the conversations of what they're bringing to the characters, I want to make sure that we see that, and that we capture that, or if I can find a way to make a bigger thing of it, then I will.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one question that I ask any DP, cinematographer, any creative artist who works behind the camera anytime I get a chance to speak to them. And I'm really curious about your answer to this. So when you're shooting, and in your case, you've had the chance to shoot so many amazing stars, Daisy Ridley, Naomi Watts, the cast I just mentioned here, Donald Sutherland. Do you know that you're shooting something special as you're actually shooting? Or is it just you're so locked into capturing the shot that it's hard to kind of transcend or really get a feeling for what exactly you're shooting? Can you
Mm.
tell that, hey, I'm watching a very special performance?
Yeah, that. But often, like, it's not a thing that it's in the forefront of my mind or I'm conscious of. But because I operate the camera myself generally,
Yeah,
so I'm getting to be there, being the first audience of a scene often. And there's certainly been those moments where it just hits me that, wow, well, this is a really amazing moment and an incredible performance. And there's many times where I get emotional and I feel hopefully what's the same emotion the audience is feeling at that same time, or I just look in the viewfinder and think, wow, this looks just like the movie I'd like to be sitting in a cinema watching and
right.
enjoying. And it only becomes that when it all comes to life, because you often walk onto a set and you see the edges of the paint and the set brackets and apple boxes and
Sure.
sandbags, but when you look through that frame and you see it come to life, the magic can really happen sometimes. And I really appreciate it. And there's something which I never like that. Sometimes, I mean, you'd probably get asked it too. Do you get to a point where you know so much about how films are made that you just don't get to enjoy them anymore? But not for me. I mean, unless it's not a great film and you start to notice things that are like, and pulls you out of it. But I still want to be able to go, and even if it's something that I shot, I still want to watch it and feel like I'm experiencing it and enjoying it like an audience for the first time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's one thing that's very interesting you brought that up, because as deeper as I get into this and speaking to other creative artists, my love of film, it's sometimes when you peek behind the curtain, it's like the magic is, I don't want to say it's lost, but when you get to see that it's just Denson Baker's a human being. He is just like,
Yeah.
you and I, and he helped make this project come to life. And sometimes it loses the magic. And I'm so happy that you mentioned that you rewatch your stuff. There's a lot of people I've spoken to that do not watch any of their stuff, just either
Mm.
because they're too self-critical or they're like, oh, I wish I did this instead of that. Can you confidently just sit back, watch your stuff, and just, you know what, this is what I put out there? Or does the human and the creative artist in you be like, oh, I should have shot this that way. I should have, maybe the lighting's a little off. How does that go for you?
Yeah, well, going to a screening of something that I like to the premiere is an emotional roller coaster, because there will be moments of me being so absorbed in it that I'm just loving it, to then the moment where a shot comes up where I cringe or remember something terrible that happened that day, or I remember that I wanted to do something different and just didn't have the time, or I wish I had done something differently, and that hopefully those moments pass. And the interesting thing is sitting with an audience and just feeling their reactions and knowing that
Yeah.
they're getting a sense that they're not noticing that little bit that I'm upset about. They're looking at something else and they're loving it.
Right.
And then, but yeah, I mean, I also very occasionally, I mean, I'm married to a director,
Yep.
and my wife, Claire, she doesn't, and she directed the Luminaries, but she doesn't always like to watch back anything that she's done, interestingly. But me, I enjoy it. She thinks that I've got some I don't know how she sees it, but um,
Some sort of like sixth
actually,
sense or something where you can just put yourself away from the project and just enjoy it for what it is.
well, somewhat. I mean, I think she feels it's torture, whereas for me, I can feel like I also feel like it's a learning experience as well.
Absolutely.
And I think watching things many years after you've done them, you start to see new stuff and appreciate things that you did. And there's often sometimes, in fact, it happened to me a few times where I've been in a bar and I've seen that there's a TV up in the corner and something comes up on the screen and I'm thinking, oh, that looks pretty good. And I'm looking at it like, actually looks pretty familiar. And then it occurs to me, oh, I shot that. It all comes back to me as I completely forgot that I did that, and I actually really quite like it. I like what I did there, and you forget how you did it or what happened, and then memories come back. I mean, I think it's actually quite an interesting thing to be able to have. For me, every project I've done is it's like a chapter in my autobiography. Not that
Yeah,
I'm writing one,
absolutely.
but it's like this is a little chapter in my life, and it's quite nice to revisit those sometimes. And you, for me, all the memories come back of everything else that was happening around me at that time that project was made.
Absolutely. So on the last topic of cinematography and filming, I'm really curious. Is there a story or two that just stick out to your mind from any of your shoots? I know you had mentioned one at the very start, but let's talk about maybe a bit more of a positive one rather than, someone being injured, sadly. Is there something that pops in your mind or that you will stick with or you'll always have that memory of filming?
Yeah, well, the one that immediately pops into my mind when you mentioned that, I can still remember, and there's only been like two moments I think where I've been operating the camera, and I just feel this whole wave of emotion come into me,
Nice.
and like my eyepiece fogs up, and I can't see what I'm doing. But there was one particular time which I remember, and I mean, it was the scene that it was for a film called Oranges and Sunshine. It was with a UK director that Jim Loach. We shot in both the UK and in Australia. It was a co-production. But we did this one scene with Hugo Weaving, who like I'd already known from The Matrix and
Of
from Lord of
course.
the Rings, and knew him as this awesome movie star. But he was just the most down to earth and lovely guy, and was everyone's friend, and took the crew out for drinks after him and Emily Watson shouted us all drinks after one particular big day as well at the end of a week, and just absolutely down to earth people. But I remember this one shot one scene that we did with Hugo where he just all the emotion comes out for his character. It was the biggest emotional moment
Right.
in the whole show, and when he just starts to hold back this emotion, I could see it in his performance, and but for me, I could feel it welling up inside myself, and which was amazing. I mean, that's what you want the audience to feel, and that's when
Absolutely.
I was feeling like, okay, what I'm feeling right now, that's what the audience is going to feel. But it's also one of those moments is like, I'm also the camera operator, and I can't mess this up. I got to keep the shot
You have the
framed up, and
responsibility of capturing this for guys like me and for everyone else. It's
yeah.
on you, man.
Yeah, exactly. And the eyepiece did completely fog up. I couldn't even see where he was, and I just like, okay, just keep the camera where it is. Open my other eye, so I'm sort of split between feeling emotional, but also like being professional and responsible. And so I just kept the frame where it needed to be. And if he moved a little bit, I just moved the camera and and then when it was edited together, the shot was brilliant and great. And they used that particular take, and it stuck with me forever, just feeling like and when talking to the rest of the crew, some of them, they were outside in the corridor, they said they were having the same feelings. They could just feel the emotion coming from Hugo into all of us, and it's beautiful having moments like that.
Yeah, we can all just hope that we just continue to have those moments because that's what, filmmaking is. So making us feel and making us feel like we were kids watching something for the first time. So you mentioned something like Star Wars, Back to the Future. To me, it's like Harry Potter, it's stuff like that
Mm.
that made me feel. And that's just the beauty of filmmaking, in my opinion. So yeah, that's awesome. As you wrap up here with Mr. Denson Baker, it is now time for a segment I like to call the final act. Mr. Baker, I'm gonna give you 60 seconds and 15 rapid fire questions about your likes, your dislikes. If you go over the 60 seconds, it's all good. We just want the
Okay.
first thing that pops into your mind. Are you up for the challenge?
Okay. Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. I feel more nervous than I do shooting a film, but go on.
Movies or TV shows?
Movies.
Theater or watch at home?
Theater, if there's not too many people in the audience.
Last movie you watched at a theater?
Oh, cannot even remember.
All right, well, let's
So
go.
long ago.
All good, no worries.
It was a year ago. What was that, a
Oh,
year ago?
like The Gentleman or like Harley Quinn or something like that. I don't know. What's one
Can't
sequel?
even remember.
Hey, all good. What's one sequel better than the original?
Yeah, I mean, Empire Strikes Back, I'd have to say, but the original's still absolutely phenomenal.
That's usually the default answer.
Yeah. Am I cheating?
We'll let you off the hook for this one. The next one.
Okay.
What's the best trilogy of all time, not named Star Wars or The Godfather?
Back to the Future.
All right. Ties into our next question. Should Hollywood reboot Back to the Future?
Absolutely not.
Another default
Yeah.
answer.
I mean, they
Favorite?
could probably come up with a clever way to do it, but yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Favorite horror movie?
Oh, nothing's coming to mind. Although I did watch The Thing again recently and really enjoyed it.
All right, that's fair.
Let's say The Thing.
All right, The Thing. Summer or fall?
Definitely fall.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Occasionally.
All right, so we're gonna have to edit that out. Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones?
That's Game of Thrones for me.
Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter?
Absolutely Lord of the Rings, but I still really appreciate Harry Potter.
All right. What was the first camera you ever bought?
Ever bought? It was a stills camera. I bought a little Minolta 35mm camera, which had black and white in it. Loved
Right
it.
on. Right on. Favorite camera to shoot on?
The Arri Alexa and all
Okay.
the different versions of it.
Right on. Film or digital?
Uh, I'm a digital guy now. Yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
so glad I started in film. Yeah,
Yeah. Right on.
absolutely got me down the right path. But yeah, digital all the way now.
Digital. Describe the Luminaries in one word.
One word. Oh, now that is tough.
No passing on this.
Illuminating.
All right, illuminating. There we go. Bam. We got through the 15 questions, slightly over the 60 seconds, but hey, we got your honest opinions and answers, and that's all we can ask for, man. So thank you for all of that. Denson, where can we find you online?
You can go to densonbaker.com.
Perfect. DensonBaker.com. You can see all of his social media on there. Denson, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. And thank you for your contributions to the creative art. I, for one, am looking so forward to the Luminaries and all your future projects. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to having you back on the show to discuss the next one.
Absolute pleasure. I look forward to it.